Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome, everybody, to the Shebeen. I was going to say it's Sunday night, but it's Friday night. We've changed the night because we should always keep you guessing. We've moved to a Friday night, and all because Lauren wants to have a good lie-in on, she wants to have a good lie-in on a Saturday morning and not on a Monday morning when she's all the work to be done.
I feel like it's rather hard to be productive on a Monday morning when you've been up to about 1:30, 2 a.m., even 2:30 by the time your brain switches off. Whereas on a Saturday, no plans, take it easy. It works better for everyone. And who knows, we might get a bigger audience over time, even a bigger Irish audience as well, because people don't mind staying up a little bit later on a Friday evening.
That's it. And look, change is hard, but there's nothing as constant as change. So we'll adapt. We're doing more things, and we need a full focus set of eyes, couple of sets of eyes on a Monday morning. So welcome to Friday night, folks. I used to do the lock-in on a Friday night, 63 weeks in a row. We did the lock-in over COVID, and that was a massive undertaking. The old lock-ins, 4 hours long, some of them. My liver never recovered. I can thank the lock-ins for the onset of gout. And what can you do? I suppose an occupational hazard. But we've decided Friday night is our night. And we'll waste our weekend rather than wasting our productive week. How are you all doing? I hope you're well. Great to see so many familiar faces tuning in. Some of you in protest of it being a Friday night. That's fine. Especially Dave, who was asked if he would prefer Friday or Sunday, and he said Saturday, which is a Dave answer. But you're all very welcome. Those who are new, this is a very informal, and as you will discover very quickly, unrehearsed, unplanned, very poorly threaded together attempt at entertainment. We really do this to entertain ourselves around Irish whiskey, and we never fail to be surprised that people actually tune in to join in said unplanned and unrehearsed entertainment. We're going to talk tonight about Irish whiskey as we do every week. And Lauren, we have a kind of a special angle on tonight, don't we?
We do, yes. So I think to preface this evening, what we're talking about is completely subjective. So myself and Barry will each select 5 whiskies that we believe every home bar should have, and really ultimately 5 whiskies that would make a fantastic whiskey tasting for all budgets, all palates, all knowledge levels. But really, it is totally subjective. There is no right way to drink whiskey. There is no right or wrong whiskey that can be your favorite whiskey. It's completely up to you. So we'll have a bit of crack with it, and we'll see what everyone thinks. Maybe do a vote at the end to see whose 5 is the preferred lineup.
Lauren,
competitive streak.
We already saw in the comments online on Facebook people saying, I don't care what the lineup is, I'm voting for Lauren, which seems wholly unfair to my efforts and the work I put in, that you just get this blanket win.
That was only Brian. I only saw Brian say that now, in fairness. So you might pull a few votes back.
That's true. I did kick him out of the group immediately when I saw such blatant playing to the blonde jury. I didn't like it. We had this idea during the week that we wanted to explore what a home bar should have in terms of its Irish whiskey lineup. And we've been talking for a few weeks now about the sheer scale of the Irish whiskey industry in terms of releases. John Teeling, the godfather of Irish whiskey, talks about 700 Irish whiskey brands. I've never counted them all, but that is wholly believable when on a recent count of just peated whiskies, I got to 89 or 87. So 700 does not seem out of the question for Irish whiskey brands, which means there's a lot of choice. I think, Lauren, you said in the past that when you were growing up, there wasn't an Irish whiskey in the house, I don't think, but did you have an Irish whiskey in the house growing up?
It was always, even though my parents aren't whiskey drinkers and none of my immediate family really are, there was always somehow a bottle of Bushmills Original and Bushmills Blackbush in the house. Probably gifted along the way at some stage.
And I had our family had Powers in the house, but there was no such thing as having like 5 Irish whiskies. Or I know this group, I saw this audience here, some people in the comments on Facebook this week saying, wait, how can a bar only have 5 Irish whiskies when so many of these folks are like, I've got 120 bottles open, or I've got 50 on my shelf. So it's this is it's going to be not a fit, or this will be different for everybody, won't it? It'll be, like you said, so subjective.
Definitely. I mean, we've picked five. Well, we have one that was shared, and for good reason. But there could be 105 that you include on whiskies that every bar should have. There's just so much selection now, and I feel like almost every year there's one or two whiskies that come out that do become the almost everyday pours, the really affordable, really versatile whiskies that appear, and it just gets added to every single year. So your bar is ever growing with the way the Irish whiskey industry is moving, which is great. Of course, no complaints.
We want to arm you all with as much information as possible to spread the gospel of Irish whiskey, as you all do so well. We love hearing stories of, oh, my cousin came over and he was a bourbon fan and I poured a drop of X, Y, and Z from Ireland and now he's converted. And we hear these stories all the time. And I think it always helps to have information and stories and knowledge and background and context to a lot of the whiskies, because I think it helps tell that story and spread that gospel a little bit more. So we're kind of being a bit sneaky tonight. We're kind of using you all as Trojan horses to go out into the world filled with the stories of Irish whiskey. Not that you kind of need to sneak in anywhere. You make yourselves known with your Irish whiskey knowledge and love. That's what we want to do. We want more people to know about Irish whiskey so that the distilleries that keep opening can stay open, and those that are in planning will have good reason to open. So Irish whiskey is growing, but it can't grow forever. And so we want to make sure that we're getting as many people into the tent as possible. And tonight is a chance for us to dive into, we think, maybe the basics in a bar, like the staples, the ones that will allow you to tell a story, the ones that are not exorbitant price-wise, the ones that are maybe representative of a range of things in Ireland, be it style, approach, philosophy, things like that. But there's no kind of one. We didn't just say there's one rule to choosing these five, did we?
No, not at all. I think each of us, it was quite interesting, our thought process behind selecting the five that we did, because we have taken, even only with five each, we've taken a lot into consideration, as you said, Barry, like the affordability side of things, the price point, the accessibility, versatility, innovation. So many things are coming into play here. Yet I know certainly for my five choices, there's only one that would reach over the $100 price point. The rest are
Same.
under, and by a large margin. So as we said at the beginning, it's all kind of interests and all price points that we've covered here. I think it'll be quite interesting to see.
Yeah.
And it was so interesting to see as well, on Facebook, over 100 comments of everyone selecting their own five. And I think the one overarching theme was only five. This is impossible. And it is hard. It definitely is. And I mean, there's so many routes you could go down here. I mean, I was even thinking as well about Waterford Distillery and their sort of focus around terroir. Could you select five Waterford? Yeah, there you are. Could you select
1,
five
2,
brands from
3,
Waterford?
4, 5, 6. Yeah. I
Yeah,
know.
and explore that avenue and go down how, different fields, everything impacts the final product. So I had a lot of cogs turning in my brain to see how you could do. You could even pick one brand that's really experimented with cask finishes, like Method of Madness and different woods. So many avenues you could have explored.
I posed the question I think it was only this morning, maybe I posed it in the group.
Yeah.
But we had distillery owners, whiskey brand owners chime in. And what I really loved was actually seeing their recommendations on a selection that wasn't just their whiskies, where they, of course, suggested, well, you'll need one of mine, but I also love X, Y, and Z. So if you do get a chance, go into the Irish Whiskey Fans of America group, just do a search for my name, and you'll find the post. And there's more than 100 comments. And it's really interesting to see the selections, and in some cases why people chose them, which is always fantastic to hear. I'm the first, you're the first, I think the first as well, Aaron, to say we don't have the answers at all. We just know what we like. We can't tell you what to drink. We can't tell you what you should be buying or drinking. And I've always been afraid to look like I am telling anybody what to drink. Like I'm not an expert. I'm an enthusiast that just has gone further down the rabbit hole, perhaps, and I think that I know what I like, and I love sharing about what I like, but it doesn't mean by any stretch of the imagination it is the definitive list, or that it is all that you can go and find. You all educate me on what's out there and available in your area every day as well. So that's always eye-opening.
Exactly. And it always amazes me, even now taking part in more whiskey tastings as opposed to hosting them, which is a very nice problem to have. It always amazes me how you can have a room full of 40 to 50 people and you taste a whiskey and every single person will pick up something different from that whiskey. Some don't like it, some do like it. You could have 4 whiskeys and the room will be completely divided as to what the favorite is. So there genuinely isn't a way, and there's no whiskey out there that will please every person in that room. So that's something else you kind of have to take into consideration as well. Ultimately, you know, if you're hosting whiskey tastings, even pulling whiskeys out of the cupboard for your friends, gauge what they like and what they normally drink, what whiskeys, bourbons maybe they normally drink, and go from there. Completely subjective. So I don't think we can drive home that point enough.
No. Lauren, can I get you to turn down your volume just a small bit? There's a bit of feedback. If you're new to Irish whiskey and you find yourself in a community of people talking about whiskey, the early days of that can seem a little bit overwhelming, can seem a little bit like you don't know anything. And we all started somewhere where we didn't know anything. I have fantastic memories of how idiotic I was picking up a bottle of Jameson in Ohio back in 2014 and looking at the label and saying, Jameson's made in Cork. I don't know that I twigged, or I don't know. I grew up in Cork. It's an embarrassing thing to say, but it can be overwhelming and it can feel a little bit intimidating. So I'd always recommend, if you see somebody saying a very definitive statement around Irish whiskey, like you should never do this, or this is the best, or this is the worst, always add on for your own sanity 3 other words, which is in their opinion, and it'll soften things a little bit more, because I can tell you from talking to the most celebrated, lauded, educated makers of whiskey on the island of Ireland, they themselves share how they don't have all the answers and they don't have a prescriptive way of how something should be consumed. They just know what they like as well. That should give us great confidence and courage to explore our way and not just try to fit into somebody else's version of our whiskey world.
Yeah, exactly. And think as well, even yourself, when depending on your mood, what kind of day you've had, that will completely determine what you want to drink. There are some nights when it's really cold, you've got the fire on, you just want a really sort of neat cask strength high ABV whiskey to warm you up from the inside out while the fire is warming you up from the outside in. Or you're out with your friends, you maybe want something that's going down a little bit easier, whiskey ginger. In summer, you might have a whiskey sour, an espresso martini, whatever it might be. So there's so many determining factors as to what you want to drink and when you want to drink it. And as we always say, and we've said this, I think, almost in every single Shebeen, and I used to say it in every one of my tastings as well, there is no right way to drink whiskey. It's all down to you and what you prefer.
We gather here as lovers of whiskey, but really, I think if we were all to be honest, we're lovers of the community and the stories and the connection around it. And whiskey happens to be this little wonderful little vehicle for us connection. But those of us who do meet like this and gather and sniff and talk about notes and tastes, like we're in the minority in the world of whiskey, because the majority of whiskey is not consumed in fancy glasses, is not consumed in leather chairs or in oak paneled rooms. You know, the reality is that most whiskey is consumed in shots or in cocktails, and that's fine. Like that's great because it's enjoyed. If it's remembered, it's enjoyed, depending on the time of the morning where it's consumed. But we are the minority, and it's okay. We should be okay with a big glass full of ice, and a big splash of ginger, or your very favorite Pepsi Max. You know, whatever you choose yourself.
Waiting for that.
We're not going to force this down anyone's throat. However, €2 in Tesco with the club card today. Like it's okay to mix whiskey. It's okay to what you want with it. So when we chose these 5 whiskeys, we're basically saying, look, this is the ground floor with a push. It's not, your €500 bottles. It's not your 5,000 or your 50,000 euro bottles. It's your ground floor table stakes.
Exactly. And if you think about it, you're saying about ourselves and our community being in the minority of drinking whiskey like this, needing a glass. You think about it, if the only way you could drink whiskey was like this, we wouldn't have the industry that we do. So it is through the cocktails, it's through the mixing, the sort of long drinks, tall drinks that has helped the industry progress and thrive when there wasn't the growth that it's experiencing today. And another thing as well about community and the people, I genuinely think almost every whiskey, certainly every whiskey that's had kind of an impact on me that I really, really liked, I can remember the place that I first tasted it and who I was with. So it really does build that sense of community around the bottle. Like every bottle almost has a story, which is lovely. So it's not just about the liquid, it's about who you've tried it with, who you will taste it with, and lovely things like that. So more than just a drop. Yeah.
That's very emotional. You get us all going now.
There you are. 17 minutes in and there's tears rolling down everyone's cheeks.
I remember years ago. I have a memory of going to a friend's house many years ago, and she had this great way of connecting with a bottle of, be it whiskey, be it wine. And whenever somebody came to the house and gave a gift, come for dinner, bring a bottle of wine or a couple of bottles of wine, bring a bottle of whiskey. She had all these tags, and she would put on the tag the name of the person who gave the bottle and put it around the bottle. And if it went into the cellar or went into the cupboard, whenever that person came back the next time, she'd say, "We should get Barry's bottle. He brought this last time." And then out would come the bottle of whiskey. I thought, oh, what a wonderful way to remember and mark. You brought that bottle. Let's share it together. Yeah, so it is about people and connection, isn't it?
That's lovely, actually. Yeah, really. I wish I'd done that with all my bottles now. I'll go back through them all and remember where I was. But it is like, I mean, that's why we created Irish Whiskey Experiences, was because of our love for the people in the community and everyone that you're so privileged to have access to in the industry, that you can learn from and share a whiskey with. And you know, every single week, I know, Barry, you're the same. Every week, every other week, every month, I feel like I'm learning something new about a brand or a certain piece of whiskey history or a certain whiskey itself. It just never ends, and it never should end. You should always be open to learning and to having those moments with
Lauren, what are you kicking off this evening with in your glass?
So this evening, I'm kicking off with one of my 5 choices, one of yours as well, a good drop of Bushmills Black Bush. I don't believe I could have, in good conscience, created a list of 5 whiskies that every home bar should have, every bar actually in general, without including Black Bush. So that's what's in my glass, first of all. I think you're the same, are you?
I'm the same. I've got Black Bush as well. Yeah, kicking off here at Black Bush. We both arrived on tonight and asked each other, "What are you drinking?" We both said Black Bush. Speaks to the quality. Before we get into the 5 whiskies that each of us has chosen, for those of you who care about such things, after we go through the 5 and talk about a whiskey, how to taste your whiskies together, I'll be doing a little reveal later on. I didn't announce this earlier, but I'm going to reveal our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club tasting. We have new wonderful little tasting kits, and inside are there's wonderful little bottles in here. I'm going to reveal what the next tasting is going to be for our whiskey club. So if you're interested in trying new whiskies with the people who make the whiskies, you'll want to stay tuned for that after we go through our 5 whiskies. And if you have any questions tonight, if you have any complaints, any ridicules, criticisms, please address them all in writing to Lauren. She'll put her address up on the screen later, and she'll deal with all of those. But if you have any feedback or questions, throw them in the chat there. We'd love to have the crack with you tonight.
I'll pretend they're fan mail.
You'll get sacks of fan mail delivered and sacks of complaints. We noticed a couple of things about the suggestions and the recommendations from our group about what the 5 whiskies might be, and it was one of the observations was how it was predominantly Middleton oriented. Now, this isn't a surprise when there's 40 plus expressions of whiskey. There's more whiskeys come out of Middleton by volume and by range. than any other distillery on the island of Ireland. And they have the greatest distribution of Irish whiskey globally. One of the largest drinks companies in the world owns Irish Distillers, the parent company of Middleton. And so distribution is a lot easier than it is for the small 1.5 barrel a week distilleries in Ireland. So Middleton very heavily represented all of the suggestions. We've also been conscious in our list not to just rely completely on the one behemoth distillery when there are so many others that deserve a mention at the same time.
Exactly. And that was also a consideration of mine, was include at least one smaller brand, smaller distillery, because at the end of the day, as for the exact reasons you've just mentioned, Barry, it is harder for them to kind of infiltrate markets, spread awareness of their brand due to their size. So it's nice that they have a really tight-knit community of people who are championing them and shouting their name and talking about them and posting them. And that's exactly what we've done as well with at least one of our suggestions.
The other observation was the thing you touched on earlier, the subjectivity. So everybody comes to the table with a different wallet, with a different set of available whiskies, with different geography and distribution, with different, perhaps they're further or not as far down the whiskey journey as others, and that all influences the recommendations, and so it makes for the most fascinating reading to go back through that. But again, we'll reiterate before we go into this, there is no one recommendation. This is ours that we've chosen, and you can throw things at the screen. You can scream blue murder. You can tell us we're idiots and fools and we know nothing. That may be true, but we still have the right to our 5 whiskeys, as do you.
Yeah. Well, I feel like we both have 2 to 3 very solid choices in here that everyone will be like, yeah, that's a great option. I don't think there'll be too many things thrown at our screens, in fairness, especially price point as well. I think we haven't played it safe. I think we've just played it smart. So what I considered when I was choosing these 5 was a classic whiskey, a whiskey that represents innovation, affordability, and versatility as well. Those were kind of the main things that I kept at the forefront of my brain when I was selecting these whiskies. Yours was roughly the same, Barry, as well. I know yours was accessibility and price point was important for you.
Accessibility and price were big for me because there's no point in me choosing 5 whiskies that are available in one shop 3 miles from a distillery, and that's it, because, well, that's really not an essential whiskey for the bar. It might be something special. So that's what I did. We did bear that in mind. So again, very, very loose kind of rules here, but the very least price, accessibility, and then we didn't even go down the road of saying we had to represent every style necessarily.
No, we didn't. I think I have, but not necessarily intentionally. That wasn't really the aim. I know maybe that is something to consider if you're hosting a tasting and you have a group of people who are maybe beginning their whiskey journey. They don't have a solid knowledge of the styles of whiskey. We know largely in our community that isn't the case, but it's always something to keep in the back of your head, certainly.
This graphic you see on the screen, you'll notice an orange bar at the bottom, which is slightly at an angle because that represents the slippery slope that is the purchase of Irish whiskey. And once you get on this slope, it is a very slippery slope. And I saw some comments earlier that I will echo and give validation to. Somebody earlier said that they started with, let me see if I can find this comment. Oh, yes. David Stewart said 10 years ago he had 4 or 5 bottles, all bottom shelf. Now he's a custom cabinet with near 200 bottles. Matt Beach started with a single bottle of Green Spot, wondering how anyone could have more than a bottle or 2 on the shelf. Now he finds himself with 7 different bottles, and the collection is only growing. And we all felt the same way. I remember when I first met Lauren, she had 1 or 2 or 3 bottles of Bushmills on the shelf behind her, and now she's like a small off license.
I promised myself, so when I started my whiskey journey in 2014, 10 years ago, wow, 10 years ago, I promised myself, listen, you're in the industry now, you taste whiskey, fairly regularly, certainly every week at least, by events and different things and whiskey festivals. You don't need to buy every bottle that you like. And look at me now. Now I don't listen and didn't take my own advice, and here we are. But yeah, it's
Slippery slope.
hard. It's
It
hard.
is.
Yeah, it really is, especially when, as we said earlier, maybe it is a smaller brand and you're a little bit enamored with them and you really want to support them. You're like, sure, what's another bottle? That won't harm me. And it just goes on and on and on. And then you almost get FOMO. I know a lot of our community suffer badly, me included, with FOMO with different releases. So I get it. I totally understand it. It is slippery out slope.
This is why brands don't release all their whiskeys in smaller bottles, because they know we'll buy the bigger one.
Yeah.
They're no fools. All right. Let's crack on into it. And Lauren, maybe you'll name your first whiskey in no particular order and give us tell us why you chose this one.
Of course. So, as Barry said, none of these are in any particular order. My first whiskey that I believe that every home bar should have is the good old classic Blackbush Irish whiskey, of course, produced by Bushmills up on the County Antrim coast. Blackbush is one of, if not the most affordable blended Irish whiskey on the market. It's affordable, it's versatile, and it packs a serious punch for being an 8-year-old blended sherry cask finished whiskey at 40% ABV. It has been in my house since I can remember. As I said earlier, it never leaves my house. I will always make sure I have a bottle of Blackbush. And I know that this whiskey is an entry for many, many people on their Irish whiskey journey. Loads of people start with Blackbush. They go into some of the older Bushmills expressions, into the malts, and then they go from there maybe into pot still whiskies and so on and so forth. So it's one of those whiskies. I feel like it's a nostalgic whiskey because so many people have a story centering around Blackbush. And as I said, it's always a staple. It's phenomenal neat on its own. It makes an absolutely phenomenal old fashioned, and I am never without it. And it was a very popular suggestion on Facebook today as well.
I applaud your selection. I've long maintained it's the best value blend in Irish whiskey. 80% malt, 20% grain. You don't get blends like that very often, certainly not at that price point. In fact, it's very much the other direction normally, where you're getting 90+% grain and only a small percentage of malt or pot still in your blends. Blackbush, I don't know how it's profitable, but we don't tell people that we think it could be more. Fantastic value.
Phenomenal value. It's just such a great whiskey. You can pick it up in Ireland for about €30 for a 700ml bottle, and I think about $35. So you're never going to break the bank with a bottle of Blackbush. And I feel like it's one of those whiskies when you're in a bar or you have friends around and you're debating what to drink, you don't really know. It's always a safe bet. You'll never go wrong with the drop of Blackbush, especially with a pint of stout. It's one of my favorite combinations, black and black. Always has been, always will be. You can't fault it.
Lauren, tell us about the casks in Blackbush. What is it matured in?
So Blackbush is aged primarily in ex-Oloroso sherry casks from the Antonio Paez Bodega in Jerez in the south of Spain, and a very small percentage of bourbon casks, ex-bourbon casks in there as well. So the sherry influence really does shine through. You're getting all those classic notes and flavors that you would associate with a sherry aged whiskey, the dried fruits, the raisins, but there's a lovely little sort of subtle peach note I often find to Blackbush as well, which is lovely. It's delicate on the nose, and then the flavor really comes through when you have a sip of it, and it's a real lingering whiskey. So you could have a sip of this and it lingers on your palate for a good few minutes after you've finished. So it's very, very full-bodied, around about 8 years old, a little bit older, cracking whiskey.
Unbelievable. And I was very late to the Blackbush party, very, very late in my whiskey journey. And when I discovered it for the first time, I remember thinking to myself, how have I missed out on this? And how have I not been drinking this all the time? It's a cracking whiskey. So quickly did it advance up the ranks of the hierarchy of whiskeys in my mind and my stable, is that it is also my recommendation for a whiskey this evening. It is one of my 5 whiskeys. Black Bush is one of my recommendations because it is the best value blended Irish whiskey in the world for flavor and, like Lauren said, for packing an absolute punch. To get 80% malt content Oloroso sherry casks for $30 to $40 or euros is unbelievable value, and it should be on every single whiskey shelf in the world. As simple as
Agreed. And people used to say to me, "Oh, my granny used to always put a bit of Blackbush into the cake at Christmas to make a Christmas cake," or "My granddad used to always have a pour of Blackbush every night before he went to bed." That's what I meant by the nostalgia around the whiskey. I mean, it's been around for a very long time, and for good reason. Yeah, I think we're both very, very big fans of Blackbush. It goes without saying, Bushmills in general.
and look how far your money goes with it. I mean, it is it's unbelievable. It's either this or it's either 20 bottles of Blackbush or a bottle of Redbreast 27.
That's a good way of putting it, actually. Yeah. So if you're ever in doubt how to please your friends, a crowd pleaser, Blackbush is
we are hyping it up in a big way, but it is deserved. I've never met anyone who has argued with what we've just said.
No.
Andrew says, I've never had it, but I better go buy a couple of bottles before the folks at Bushmills get a hold of this video and the price is set to double. We have all their IP addresses blocked so they can't view these videos. Ever since Lauren started making an appearance here, we blocked their IP addresses.
No, they'll never know. Yeah, definitely, Andrew. Grab a bottle for sure. It's for people who always used to approach me and say they'd never tasted any of the Bushmills expressions. It was always Blackbush that I sent them in the direction of, first of all, because you can't have tasted Bushmills and not have tasted Blackbush. It's just not right at all.
You could skip Bushmills original and go straight to Blackbush, in my opinion. Yeah. And it's a bit like, it's not unlike in Middleton Distillery, you could skip Jameson original and go straight to Black Barrel.
Yeah, exactly. You're right.
So that's our first recommendation of the evening, and both of us chose the same one. Now, it was the only one of the 5 that we chose that overlapped. And when I first presented my list to Lauren, she looked at it and she was like, yeah, I'm coming up with my own list. This doesn't gel with my choices. Because we were going to arrive at one single list that the 2 of us were going to agree on. That didn't happen.
No, that was going to be too hard, though, I feel, because I think we each had kind of differing opinions of what makes the perfect whiskey tasting at the end of it all as well. So that's why no harm that your choices are great. I think they're brilliant. They're some of my favorite pours in there as well. But I had a few extra ideas. Also, I actually haven't had Blackbush in a very long time, and when you go back to it, you just think, oh my God, what a draw, honestly.
Lauren, name your next whiskey and tell us why you chose it.
My next whiskey probably doesn't come to a surprise to anyone, as will one of my others, is the Method of Madness Virgin Gariana Oak Cask. So this whiskey, of course, produced by Method of Madness in the micro distillery at Middleton, was launched, I think it was around Whiskey Live time, May, June last year. So the reason I picked this one, so you can pick a bottle of this up for about €95. I know it hasn't reached the US just yet, but when it does, it'll probably be about $110. So this is the only one that's over that $100 price point. The reason I selected the Gariana Oak is because it gives an insight into the innovation and the experimentation that is happening with wood in Ireland. So Gariana Oak is an oak tree species of the Pacific Northwest. So the range stretches kind of from Southern California right up to BC, to British Columbia. And the impact and the contribution that it gives to the whiskey, for me personally, is like nothing I've ever tasted before. It's almost like a smoky barbecue bacon note in there as well, kind of smoked apple.
There's no peat in it. There's no peat for anyone worrying. There's no peat.
No.
We're just talking about kind of rich barbecue almost notes.
Exactly. And it just really caught my attention when I had it for the first time last June. And me personally, I actually think it's the best value Method of Madness. I believe so anyway. And it's 46% as well. So it's just a little bit of a higher ABV, a nice sweet sort of point for many people. And that was why I tasted it,
This
picked it.
is it's a great choice. And I was surprised when I saw it, but not surprised at the same time. Because I was surprised because I'd forgotten about it. I have a bottle of it downstairs. And I was at the launch of this in Dublin last year, and it was launched at a little tasting at the same time that the new Redbreast Dream Cask was revealed. And so there was a pile of us in the room that got to taste the two of these alongside one another. So you had this 600-700 euro, €500 Redbreast Dream Cask, of which there was only 700-800 bottles. And then you had this €95 Method of Madness. And to say that the room gravitated towards the Method of Madness more than the Dream Cask is not an understatement. People left there saying, that's the best Method of Madness I've ever tasted. And it had just been up against or tasted alongside a Redbreast Dream Cask. It is, for me as well, the most flavorful, greatest tasting Method of Madness south of $120 ever released. Amazing.
I totally agree. And yeah, you're right. I remember it being launched last year, and everyone was coming out of the tasting like, you got to try the Gariana, you've got to try it. And I'd never heard of Gariana Oak in my life until this expression came out. So it's just, I mean, what Method of Madness do? I'm a very big fan of the brand anyway. I think their experimentation with wood and cask finishes is almost second to none in Ireland. And it just really shows what is possible and the level of innovation that is going on behind the scenes and will continue. So I thought it was a great choice for something a little bit different, and I'd imagine an oak finish that no one has ever tasted before.
For those of you who might have been interested in trying this, Stories and Sips will be doing a Method of Madness tasting closer to St. Patrick's Day, so stay tuned, because this might be popping up in your little tasting kits. So we're working on that at the moment, but this is due to be released in the US in the next couple of months. And it's a fantastic whiskey. Method of Madness is going through an expansion. There have been Method of Madness releases that were not produced in the small micro distillery in Middleton. They were produced in the main plant. In fact, there are Method of Madness releases that were produced in a different distillery completely, like the Method of Madness single malt. But this one was made entirely in the micro distillery. And I think there's been maybe 3 releases of Method of Madness in the past 18 or 16 months maybe that are all ex-micro distillery. So going forward, my understanding is that all the Method of Madness releases will be from the micro distillery. And micro, even though it's probably the 10th biggest distillery on the island of Ireland, but it's micro compared to its big sister behind it.
Yeah, yeah, it's by no means micro, but as you say, in comparison.
Tom says, bring a bottle to Kilrush. That must be a reference to our Irish whiskey experiences parade down Kilrush. You know what, Tom? For asking, I have the bottle downstairs. I'll bring it with me.
I also have a fairly full bottle here as well. So who knows what might appear in on the bus or in bags.
you should expect to see more Method of Madness in the US, but saying that, it is still a very small production. The United States is unbelievably complex and vast when it comes to whiskey distribution. And to give you some comparison in terms of sizes, like there's 120 million bottles of Jameson produced every year. Compare that to how many Method of Madness are produced. There might be 20, 30,000 bottles of a particular release produced. Even things like Redbreast PX, 30,000 bottles when it was first released. Gold Spot, 30,000 bottles when it was first released. Now, even if you were to just focus on the US and not leave any in Ireland, UK, Europe, Middle East, Asia, Africa, and just said, right, we're going to send all 30,000 bottles to the US, 50 states, what does that give you? 600 bottles per state. It's not going to last very long at all. So that's the challenge, is that there won't ever be widespread distribution of small batch releases like Method of Madness. But then again, some of these are just worth the hunt, and they might just be worth. And some of the greatest fun I've had is in chasing down bottles in strange locations because somebody said that's the greatest thing they've ever tasted. And I thought, I want to taste the greatest thing that guy ever tasted too.
A wild goose chase to find the bottle. Amy's just poured it there as well. Not much left in the bottle. Yeah, exactly. It's a beautiful drop. Certainly one of my favorite Method of Madness releases anyway. Best value, as we
So
said.
that was your second recommendation. I'm going to move on to my second recommendation, and it is a curveball. But my next recommendation is the legendary Dark Silky from Sleeve League Distillers. This is a peated whiskey, and I recommend this because every home bar should have a range of flavors, a range of profiles, and I believe this blended, smoky, peated whiskey is a fantastic introduction to the dark side for those who may have avoided in the past. In fact, it was one of the early introductions for me to peated whiskey. And I remember James Doherty, the owner of Sleeve League Distillers, walking me through how I should taste this. He said a big cube of ice in there, chill it down, he said, and sip on that, and you'll start to get some of those lovely flavors come out. And he wasn't wrong. It's soft, it's approachable. I often think it's like a green apple that's been dipped in a dark chocolate vat and then walked through a room where a cigar was being smoked 3 days ago. That's exactly what this is. It's a great introduction to a smoky whiskey, and I think every home bar needs one.
I'm laughing at Greg's comment. He'd include a bottle in the range, a gun range.
Which side of the gun?
We knew you would include a peated whiskey of some description in here. This might be the point where you get a few things thrown at you behind everyone's screen. You're open to it, I know.
I have a bulletproof screen here, Greg, and you can throw what you want at it. Folks, you can get this for about anywhere from $38 to $48, and it's widely available across the US. They've done a fantastic job of distribution in getting into many, many different states. It's affordable. The spirit today is distilled in Great Northern Distillery. It's a blend of malt and grain whiskies, and it is soft. It is soothing. It is like a warm blanket on a cold day. And I have brought this out at dinners where people said they want to try something different, and they've emptied the bottle. It's just a really, really interesting, approachable, soft introduction to smoky whiskies.
I'm still very much, I wouldn't even say I'm on a peat journey. I don't think I'm trying very hard, in fairness. Yeah, well, I was just about to say, I'm not just saying this because it's your whiskey, but the only peated whiskey that I have genuinely enjoyed was your Short Cross release. Mainly because to me it just tastes like a beautiful Terry's chocolate orange, and that overpowers everything else, those orange chocolatey notes. Beautiful. Who knows? I might get there. I might continue the journey.
You will. Just keep telling yourself you're on a flavor journey, not a style journey. And if you can eliminate the styles and just say, help me understand, like what helped me convert to peat was I need to know what things taste like because I want to know all the flavors. So I had to sample, and it took me a while. Like it took me a while to get into it.
I think as well, because when you ask the question or someone asked the question in the group about how many peated whiskies there were, like 84 is unbelievable. And I think it slowly removes the stigma that all Scotch is peated, all Irish is unpeated. It's slowly undoing that myth, which is great. Obviously, we're never going to say no to a bit of education, but I think it was someone pointed it out because was it Connemara still had on the back of the bottle the only Irish peated whiskey? Is that still there?
Well, I think there's no point in them going to the 80 euros of expense to reprint the label. So they've decided, no, you know what? Let's just go with it. It's okay.
I'm just going to ride this wave. No problem. Rich just said, have to find a peated fireball for me. I wouldn't be opposed to it. My guilty pleasure.
I suppose, look, we can't knock anything if we're chasing flavor.
Exactly.
John says the first whiskey chase he took was a day drive to Boston, the original Redbreast small batch cask strength selections. That was the very first bar he made me do it. John, I remember that chase myself because that was one of my first big chases as well. when I heard that these small batch Redbreasts were coming out in California and Massachusetts, I remember calling a friend of mine. She worked for, at the time she worked for Irish Distillers in Massachusetts. And I said, you have to track these down. Tell me what stores are getting them. And then you have to buy them for me. And she was like, I don't know if I've got enough money on my credit card to buy like even like 2 or 3 bottles. I said, I'll PayPal you. I'll find you the money. Like, we'll get you this money. You have to buy these bottles. And they were only about $110 or $120, I think, or $99 at the time. But it was such a fun chase to get these bottles. And I still remember like the story behind it. Like, and it's true. Like you connect with the more than just the flavor.
Yeah, exactly. What bar you were in, how you obtained the bottle, who you were with, all of it. It's a theater. Drinking whiskey is an art.
Doug says the Dark Silky is officially on the chase list. Yeah, look, it's not hard to find. Honestly, it's in. I think they're in maybe 40 states at this stage. They've done a fantastic job of distribution. They are, and there's more to come. So, Sleeve League Distillers is the name of the company. It's kind of Ardara Distillery in Donegal is the distillery that is yet to release its own spirit. So this is sourced whiskey from Great Northern Distillery, but their own whiskey as of. We found out today because James Doherty, the owner of the distillery, posted in our group a reply to the 5 whiskeys. One of his was, he said, a 2-year-old nearly whiskey from the Ardra distillery, which was a sherry cask matured, nearly a whiskey. So they've got some, they're doing almost 100% peated whiskeys. And I think they're doing some non-peated to custom orders, but they're an almost entirely smoky distillery, which would be the first in Ireland.
I think they're bringing back a Donegal tradition, aren't they, as one of their kind of main aims, which is lovely. And it's such a moment for brands and distilleries when they finally have their own spirit. Certainly want to be celebrated. Same happened with Nick Ryan of Thomond Gate last week. The first whiskey he had, the 100% barley from Limerick, that came of age, didn't it, last week?
Yeah, that's
big
right.
Big moment.
Right, Lauren, tell us the name of your next choice and why it's your choice.
Is anybody surprised? Answer no. My next choice for whiskey, which is a relatively recent addition, which I think every home bar should have, is the wonderful Powers Rye whiskey. This is Ireland's first 100% rye mash bill whiskey. Of course, produced once again at the Middleton Distillery. This is my last expression out of the Middleton Distillery. And again, it really kind of leans into that kind of innovation that's happening in Ireland. The traditional route of pot stills and malts and grain whiskies and so on isn't being exactly followed as it was in the past. And again, it's such an affordable drop of whiskey. It's so flavorful and a great price. You can pick it up in Ireland for about 45 euro and about $34. It's available in the US as well. And I see so many people now drinking this almost as an everyday whiskey. It's right up there with the Redbreast 12s, the Powers John's Lane, the Blackbush. It's gone right up there. And it was only released probably around about this time last year, the start of 2023. I adore this whiskey. I just love the fact that it's a clove bomb. Cooking apples come through after a few minutes as well. That clove spice, rye bread, stunning whiskey. And of course, it was going to be in my top 5.
Lauren is single-handedly keeping the production of Powers Rye going at the distillery. They have her picture up in the distillery, and every time there's a new shift comes on, people stand in front of Lauren's picture and they tip their hats and they say, "Thanks, Lauren, for giving us a job again today. We appreciate you."
Single-handedly funding the Powers Rye movement. But in all seriousness, I've spoken to brand ambassadors of Powers and the wider Middleton brands, and they say that the rye has done more for the Powers brand than any other release in recent years, even the rebrand. It's really helped put Powers kind of back on the map again, which is incredible because it's such a great brand with a really interesting, fascinating history. And it's great to see a bit of love for Powers. I always had a soft spot for Powers whiskey, and I might not have been in a position to shout about it so much before, but now I am.
couple of interesting facts about Powers Irish Rye. It is distilled entirely in column stills. It's not made in copper pot stills at all. So it's a continuous style of production. And the rye, the grain that is used in the column stills, is grown in Wexford, not far from the Powers family home, which was in Oilygate in Wexford. So there are Powers connections and connections to the historic Powers story. And Powers themselves were using a column still in John's Lane distillery in the 1950s as well. So it's not it's not unusual to use a column still, but it is the first Powers Irish whiskey made entirely in a column still. And there's been an increase in over the past few years of the quantity of rye grown in the fields in Wexford to account for the expected demand. And when this was first released in the United States, it was the entire allocation for the United States was snapped up instantly, and for good reason. And they had some of the greatest adverts I've seen in a long time. You could have walked through Times Square and seen an ad that said "Buy American Rye," and I think that sums up the confidence and the little bit of swagger that Irish whiskey can and should have of occasion.
Absolutely. And I think this is a great one. I would say if you're trying to bring the bourbon drinkers over into the world of Irish, certainly it's a great one for that. And it's only produced once a year as well, isn't it, Barry? Because they have to essentially clean the stills completely before they distill the next batch of whiskey or spirit.
Yeah, I think it's once a year that rye is made.
At the minute anyway. Yeah. Amazing job.
It does make a great old fashioned, as we can all attest to, who are on the whiskey bus last year and ended up face down in the Shelburne bar. It does make a great old fashioned. It really does. In fact, I'm out of it. Like, I've made so many old fashions with Powers Rye. I had a liter bottle, and that's gone. That's embarrassing, but it's gone.
Honestly, it's probably my most consumed whiskey at the minute, which I think you can probably tell from the bottle. There's a fair dent out of it in comparison to everything else. I genuinely think we consumed the Shelburne bar's entire stock of Powers Rye in a matter of 4 days in Cork. It was gone. Everyone was on the old fashions. I looked down at one point and there was just tables full of them.
And Powers, such an iconic brand for Ireland. For many, many years, Powers Gold Label was the most consumed Irish whiskey on the island of Ireland by, domestically consumed. That in the last few years was overtaken by Jameson. But there's a rich history of Powers going all the way back to 1791. And it's one of the 4 or 5 whiskey houses that we would have all have referred to when we were younger, be it Paddy, Powers, Jameson, Bushmills, or actually that's just 4, isn't it? Paddy, Powers, Jameson, Bushmills. Yeah, the 4 kind of whiskey families that we would have referred to. So it's great to see, like you said, Lauren, life being splashed into the brand, and let's hope it paves the way for future developments and innovations from Powers.
I agree. And if you're in Dublin, it's definitely worth a visit to John's Lane, where the distillery would have been. You seeing the old stills. It's really, we talk about moments around whiskey. It's just so incredible to see them there at the College of Art and Design. Well worth it if you're in the city and a big whiskey fan, which we did on our last whiskey bus.
We did. Do you think this makes your 5, not just because of the flavor, but because its versatility with cocktails and using it that way as well?
Totally, yeah. So again, I drink this neat most often, certainly, but as we've said, unbelievable old-fashioned. It's a great all-round whiskey. I genuinely don't think I've spoken to someone who didn't like it. Now, obviously, again, everything's subjective. There may be some people out there, I'm sure there are, but it was received so well in Ireland and obviously in the US and further afield. So it's great to see. And who knows, hopefully another expression from Powers this year as well. Fingers crossed.
And lest anybody accuse us of being elitist with our whiskey selections and only choosing the most expensive whiskeys, like you said, 35 to 45 euros or dollars, really, really affordable whiskey, which is great to see. Now, my next choice for a whiskey that must make everybody's top 5 or everyone's home bar is one of the favorite pot still whiskeys in the world. That's Redbreast 12-year-old. It's the most awarded pot still whiskey, single pot still whiskey in the world. It can be traced all the way back to 1912, the first mention of Redbreast. This should be a staple on every whiskey shelf. There is no more balanced a single pot still whiskey that has a sherry component that you will find for my money for the price, which could be anywhere from $65 to $75, depending on where you are in the United States. Redbreast 12 punches above its weight. It used to be $50, used to be $40, but of course demand has done its job, and it's now a little bit more expensive. But name one whiskey that has converted more people to Irish whiskey than Redbreast 12-year-old. Produced in Middleton Distillery, made of a mash bill of malted and unmalted barley, and only that, no other grains. Not finished, but aged in both bourbon barrels and Oloroso sherry casks, then married together. Each of those components aged for at least 12 years, married together in a ratio that only Billy Lighton and Dave McCabe know, and then presented to us in the wonderful green livery. And what a stunning whiskey.
Absolute staple. Couldn't agree more. It's one of those whiskies again where you chat to people and you ask them, where did your Irish whiskey journey start? What was one of the whiskies that really hooked you and got you hooked early on? Redbreast 12. 9 times out of 10, it's going to be that. And it's, again, another whiskey, which also does make a great cocktail. I know everyone there's sometimes people feel there should be a line drawn as to where you stop adding aged whiskies into cocktails, but if you want a good dinner, you add good ingredients and you use good ingredients. If you want a good cocktail, you use great whiskey. I love it. It's on my shelf, always has been a beauty. No more needs to be said.
We've said too much already. Bob Hurley calls it the gateway whiskey, and I'd agree with that. Some of you saying it's creeping up in price. Yeah, of course, like the United States, there's no one set price. So you're kind of relying on everything from distributors to retailers to set the pricing, unless you're in one of the controlled states where it's set automatically for you. Matt says it keeps creeping up, almost $80 in some of the stores. Cask strength is 85 to 90. Yeah. So, I mean, that's a cheap cask strength and an expensive 12-year-old. Eric has seen it as high as $89 to $99. That is a shame. We mentioned during the week that there's almost a point now in some states and in some regions where it's becoming cheaper to buy the whiskey in Ireland and have it shipped rather than buying it locally, which is an awful turn of events altogether, because it should always be cheapest where you can find it locally. But that's the strange things that are happening right now. If you are a fan of Redbreast, you may be interested in our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club tasting. We have new fancy whiskey kits. Inside, you will find 3 bottles. These 3 bottles will be filled with Redbreast whiskies, because our next whiskey tasting with our Stories and Sips Whiskey Club is with the newly appointed master blender, Dave McCabe. And early in February, probably in the first 2 weeks of February, we will be having a wonderful tasting of these 3 whiskies. And I know many of you will have not had one of them. Others you might have, but we're going to taste with Dave McCabe Redbreast Listowel. So we're actually going to taste 3 different Redbreasts at 3 different strengths. You're going to taste Redbreast Listowel at 46%. You're going to taste Redbreast Cask Strength Batch 122, which is at 58.1% in our tasting. And you're also going to taste something that is not available in the United States, Redbreast 10-year-old Distillery Edition. It's only available to buy at the Middleton Distillery. This is a 10-year-old single pot still Redbreast, and that is 43% ABV. Dave McCabe is going to lead us on a tasting as master blender, one of his first tastings as master blender of all these 3 whiskeys. So if you're a Redbreast fan or you're curious about Redbreast, stay tuned to storiesandsips.com, because we'll have details of this tasting coming up in the next week to 10 days about how you can get involved. So hopefully you're looking forward to that. If you're not, don't tell me. I'll get very upset.
They always look so lovely when they're all lined up together, don't they? When you see the full family together.
That's it.
You were saying about price and it being crazy in the US. I always see in the group in Irish Whiskey Fans of America, the price of the spots always blows my mind, and not in a good way. Like $500 for Blue Spot is insane. That's insane.
I know.
Crazy. It's a shame.
Irish whiskey, when we first got involved in it, didn't have the same challenges as bourbon did, and now just like bourbon attracted flippers and more people started drinking brown spirits. Simple as that. Price just went up. Look, it's the market doing its job. Whether we like it or not, it's just market economics. And if we don't like the price, we should stop buying it. It's as simple as that. But yeah, prices are going up, and there'll always be somebody who'll buy it at whatever price it sells for, sadly, which there's not much we can do about it. But the good news is you've never had more choice. So if there's not one that you want to pay that much money for, no problem. Move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
All right. That was my maybe third or fourth choice. I've lost track of this stage. We should have numbered these. We're so organized.
I think that was your third. Yeah, because I've done 3. Yeah. So I'm up next.
Okay, Lauren, hit us with the whiskey you've chosen and why you've chosen it.
So the next whiskey that I believe every home bar should have, for a different reason, I'm leaning more on the innovation route here, is 2 Stacks Dram in a Can Single Malt, or the blend, the green can. So this was the world's first Irish whiskey in a can. I believe they have now sold 1 million of
2
them.
million.
2 million, even better, 2 million, which is unbelievable for a tiny little can of whiskey. This again leans into the innovation and brands that are starting to think a little bit more outside the box. So they are 100ml cans. You can bring them hiking, you can bring them over to your friends, you can bring them on an airplane very easily. It abides by all security measures to board planes. And 2 Stacks is, of course, whiskey bonders based in Newry in County Down, not too far from me. So they're reviving kind of the art of Irish whiskey bonding, which is sourcing spirit, sourcing casks from various brands across the island, and allowing them to have an unbelievable library of whiskey casks and flavors that they can work with, as we've seen with some of their incredible releases that they've had in recent years. So this, for me, I think really just shows, again, that innovation, the craft that is happening in Ireland that has never happened before. When would you have ever 10 years ago seen a whiskey in a can? You just wouldn't have. And it's the reason I wanted to put it in there, because it's the art of surprise. If someone hasn't seen it before, they maybe aren't familiar with the can or with 2 Stacks, it kind of makes them question, what is this? This is interesting. It's a conversation starter. And that's why I wanted to put it in there. So they have 2, and they now also have their cream liqueur in cans as well, which is amazing because it's also a phenomenal pour.
And our next Stories and Sips Whiskey Club bottle is going to also come in a can. Our blend that you all chose as master blenders that you all were with your graduated cylinders. You chose the blend for our next Whiskey Club release, which gets, and we hope to have it bottled in the next 2 weeks, believe it or not. And you're going to get a version of it in the can as well. So thanks for the prompt there, Lauren.
You up so nicely, even though it actually wasn't planned. It worked out so well. The Redbreast tasting, Method of Madness tasting, and the 2 Stacks.
This is a giant sales pitch for Stories and Sips here. Let's not dress this up.
That's great, Paul, that you got upgraded. I'm going to try that the next time I fly somewhere. Just slip here, look at this. This is cool. Conversation starter.
I think you have to hand over the can, and as you hand it over, wink and say business class, and then leave it at that.
This one's for you. Hand it over to slide.
And if you're doing that with the green can and they say no, then you whip out the blue one and you go single malt. First class.
Exactly. Which one? I've actually seen a fair few people, the likes of Rick Green, up the mountains with dram in the can as well, which is great. Also, phenomenal value. About €10 for a sleeve of 4, and about $12. Like, you can't beat that. That's great value. Great value.
One of the things that 2 Stacks observed was that when they sold packs of their cans, that people would pay more money per milliliter of whiskey to have the cans than they would have the full bottle. So if they got $70 for a full bottle, they might get $100 for the same amount of liquid, but in can form, because people valued and paid for the convenience of it.
That's mad. Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it really is. And I mean, I know there's so many fans of 2 Stacks. Obviously, the 2 Stacks Nation, a lot of our community are also involved in that community as well. And it's great to see, because they're lovely guys, Shane, Liam, and Donal, who founded the brand. Lovely guys and really interesting cask finishes and releases coming out of there. And no end to it either. They're not stopping anytime soon, which is great to see.
It doesn't seem like they are. There's lots coming down the line, and great to see it. Like you said, you wouldn't have seen it 10 years ago. And so this is an interesting one. So if you say this should be on a home bar, it wouldn't be long falling into a home pocket and running out the door.
No, exactly. So you would need to stock up on a few sleeves of them because they're very, very easily just slid into a handbag or a pocket. Exactly. Paul just said exactly that at Garth Brooks concert. 3 of them in the hood of your jacket.
You might need 3 of them to get through a Garth Brooks concert.
That's brilliant. I'm gonna definitely bring. I've got a few. I don't have the malt at the minute, but I do have the blend, the blended cans, the green ones. I must bring them the next time I fly in a couple of weeks.
Great choice, an unusual choice, but a great one, and wouldn't have been one we had to choose from a few years ago. So I like it, and another great conversation starter for telling people about Irish whiskey and what's happening. Bear in mind, this can leapfrogged ahead of the bourbon industry, the Scotch industry, the Japanese industry, the Taiwanese industry, because nobody had ever released a straight whiskey in a can. There was no shortage of whiskey cocktails, but nobody had gone so far as to be as mad as saying, "They'll throw the whole whiskey in there. Don't mind the Coke. Don't mind the ginger."
Yeah, I think, and that was the funny thing when it was released. Everyone was kind of questioning, is it genuinely just whiskey? There's nothing else in it, really. It was that kind of denying that it could be possible, but the guys did it. They went there.
Moving from one single malt to another single malt, we're going to go with my next choice for what should be on the home bar. I nominate Bushmills 10-year-old as being one of the 5 whiskies, every Irish whiskies that every home bar should have. This is a incredible value age statement whiskey. And I think I've chosen more Bushmills than Lauren has tonight. But this should be on your home bar for a couple of reasons. One, you can get a 10-year-old single malt for under $40. Some places you can get it for $33, $34, $35 in the United States, which is incredible. You get whiskey that is made 100% with malted barley in Bushmills Distillery, an old Bushmills Distillery on the Antrim coast. And it is a gateway for many into the world of single malt. For a long time, it was one of the few kind of accessible, very affordable single malts, Irish single malts that were on the market. And I know it caused a lot of people to be introduced to the world of Irish whiskey who might have been Scotch drinkers, who knew the phrase single malt, thought they'd try a single malt, happened to be from Ireland. They bought Bushmills 10-year-old. Wonderful orchard fruits, tropical fruit notes, incredible value for 10 years old. I can't say enough good things about it.
I echo what Matt has just said. This was the first Irish whiskey I ever tasted. So when I, obviously, as many of you know, began my whiskey journey with Bushmills 10 years ago, this was the first whiskey that I tried ever. At the ripe age of 19, had no clue what I was tasting, what I was talking about, and that was the first whiskey that made me kind of, my ears pricked up a little bit, and I thought, hold on a second, that's actually very nice. And here we are 10 years later. So this started it for me. So really that should have been in my 5, but
it should have. Instead of being behind my head here.
I've spoken enough about Bushmills over the years. I'll leave that to you for now. You're right, though. It was, I think, for so many years, despite the fact Bushmills have been producing single malt for a very long time, everyone always assumes that Scotch and Scotland are the single malt producers, and it doesn't really happen in Ireland. And the 10-year, I think, was, as you said, Barry, the main driver for showing people actually there are great Irish single malts. And we created the thing in the first place, so we were the original malt. The Irish created whiskey. So yeah, great choice. Really, really good choice.
Many people in the comments saying that Bushmills 10 was my first whiskey, first single malt. Others saying Bushmills 16 was their first. Yeah. David said Bushmills 10 was the start of my journey off the bottom shelf. Yeah, it's well worth picking up. Again, it'll cost you an average of about, I think about $38 is the average across the United States for Bushmills 10. For the longest time, I think it was one of the best-selling Irish single malts in the United States, and that was then replaced by a stablemate, the Sexton, which overtook it as the best-selling single malt. It itself is a non-age statement, slightly younger than the 10-year-old.
You're exactly right. Yeah, so Sexton was 2017 that was released, and you're exactly right. Within the first year of being launched in the US, it was the best-selling Irish single malt. So it knocked its, as you say, the stablemate produced in the same distillery, and it knocked it off the top spot.
Lauren, tell us about your next whiskey and why you chose this one.
So this whiskey is from Teeling, of course. It's a Teeling Single Grain whiskey, finished in Cabernet Sauvignon casks. So the reason I had this up there actually signed by John Teeling, I don't want to open that bottle for that reason, on my shelf. The reason I picked this is because for so long we were so used in Ireland to the bourbon casks, the sherry casks being used as the kind of the main barrels for maturation, and of course they still are. But when we see distilleries kind of again start to experiment with different cask finishes, with different wines, Malaga, Marsala, Muscatel, whatever it may be, it just is a different talking point, adds a different layer of flavor, a different sort of character to a whiskey that we might never have experienced. And I thought it was a great one to include in there as well. So I have covered all styles pretty much of whiskey, which was something else I thought about doing as well for the kind of perfect lineup and what you should have in your whiskey bar. So Cabernet Sauvignon is one of the most widely recognized red wine varieties. It is associated, obviously it's grown all across the world, but it's primarily, of course, in Bordeaux in France. And I just wanted to throw it in there. Again, it's not very expensive. You can pick it up about €50, $62. And I know Teeling is very popular in our community as well. A lot of people are big fans, and that is why I included it in there. Single grain and a kind of unique cask finish.
I was thinking about whether to include a single grain or not, because I was originally, when I was planning the 5, I was putting the question to myself, should I be covering all styles? Should I have pot still, malt, grain, and blend first, and then go down that route? And I decided against it. I thought, no, let's have a different approach. So I missed out on a grain, but you did pick up on it here, and not because you needed to cover all the bases, but you've gone for it from a flavor and
Yes.
and a cask perspective.
Yeah, unique perspective. Yeah, exactly. Single grains, I know, I would say, are probably the biggest challenge. So the most kind of underrepresented style of Irish whiskey. And I know it's the style that most people not necessarily struggle with, but probably would be the less preferred. I know it is for you, single grains. Single grains, I feel, are always quite punchy. There's always almost a sharpness to a single grain, which if you like that, it's great. But it's one for me that I've had to take a little bit of a longer journey for me to fall in love with them.
Martin had a comment. I would have Black Barrel on my list. Oh, I do. So he does have it on his list. We, interestingly, and not by choice, but looking back on the list, we don't actually have any Jameson products at all. And it is the best-selling whiskey brand, Irish whiskey brand in the world, and one of the top 10 selling whiskey brands globally of all whiskies. Yet we've opted not to have it on any version or any variety from Jameson. Was that a conscious choice by you in your choosing?
Yeah, definitely. Because I feel like Jameson is familiar with everyone, whether you are a whiskey drinker, whether you're not, whether you're you would drink whiskey on occasion. If it's handed to you type thing, you'll drink it. I feel like it's the giant of Irish whiskey. Everyone's familiar with it. Everyone has probably had it at some stage. And I feel like when you're introducing people to Irish whiskey, 9 times out of 10, they've already had Jameson. So I didn't want to put it in there for that reason, because if you're trying to bring someone on a whiskey journey and educate people, you tend to stay away from the one that they're familiar with and go into something different. So yeah, it definitely was a conscious effort for me. Same for you?
I don't think that I set out not to include it, but when I thought about things like a blended, a really high quality blended Irish whiskey that was affordable, I went immediately to Black Bush and then thought, or do I go with Black Barrel? Because Black Barrel was actually the one that got me really into Irish whiskey. But then, and so I've got a bit of an emotional connection to it. But then I thought, but actually, I would now choose Black Bush above Black Barrel. So then it eliminated the Jameson. So I didn't set out to exclude it. I think it just happened that way. I think they're doing okay without us choosing them. They'll survive. Like this won't break them. Like they'll be okay tomorrow. There'll be no meetings.
There'll be no dip in sales in the next sort of quarter because we didn't put it on our list of whiskies. I think they'll be fine.
It is Richard has a point there. Jameson is associated with doing shots. In his opinion, he tries to avoid that. There's absolutely no doubt. And I do a lot of tastings with groups, American groups, corporate groups and events where when I ask the question about whether anyone has ever had any interaction with Irish whiskey at all, believe it or not, the two whiskies that come up are always Jameson and, believe it or not, proper number 12. And they're the ones that people talk about the most. They're the ones that people have the most questions about. But most people's introduction, I have found in the United States, to Irish whiskey is Jameson primarily. And normally that introduction happens early in the morning, 2:00 in the morning. And somebody brings a tray of brown colored liquid out in shot glasses that may or may not be made of glass. And that's most people's introduction. But sadly, if that was the only place to go with Irish whiskey, it would be an awful journey. Luckily, there's more to go.
Yeah. Shots, picklebacks as well. I know that's very popular in the States. Shot of whiskey, shot of pickle juice. Kind of made its way into Ireland a little bit with bartenders, but it didn't really take off. So you're right. I couldn't agree more with what Rich said there.
That pickleback, I remember having it for the first time in New York, going back maybe 10 years, and it was a Jameson ambassador. I was in a bar, and a Jameson ambassador from Ireland introduced it, and she said, "You got to try this. Do you like pickles?" I said, "I hate pickles." She said, "Do you like whiskey?" I said, "I like whiskey." She said, "Well, you love this." So she said, "It'll make the whiskey go down easier." I said, "Well, the whiskey's going down fine as it is." And she said, "No, it'll neutralize the whiskey." I thought, "Well, why do I want to neutralize the whiskey?" So she gave me this little glass, half whiskey, half pickle juice, and it tasted like a glass of water. I don't know scientifically how this works. I don't really want to know how it works. I can leave well alone. But if we're whiskey fans, are we really going for something where we have found a liquid that magically eliminates all the flavor, taste, enjoyment of whiskey just so we can consume and get drunk?
More whiskey? No, depends. Depends on the night. I'm not opposed to it. I don't mind a pickleback at all. I like pickles, so I don't mind.
Each to their own.
Each to their own. Wouldn't be my first choice now, mind you. As we all know, my shot of choice. I don't think I need to reiterate that.
Sambuca.
No, I hate the stuff.
Fireball.
Oh, Fireball or tequila. Even though I like sipping tequila, I know I have David in the comments. He's also a tequila fan. But a shot of tequila doesn't go amiss either.
You all may have some interest in Lauren's other Facebook group, Tequila Fans of America. She's trying to start a revolution there. Look her up.
I should start that. It would take on, let me tell you.
That was Lauren's final recommendation of the 5. I'm going to share with you my final recommendation, which is a bit of a wild card. But my last recommendation that you should have on your shelf is a bottle of whiskey from the Cologne distillery, the Baron Toul series of whiskies. It is their own distillate. It is 3 to 4 years of age. To date, there have only been 2 4-year-old whiskies released from Cologne. One of them was for Stories and Sips, and the other one has gone to the friend at hand. And they are phenomenal flavor bombs, and they are indicative of handmade whiskey that takes a long time, is uneconomical to make, ties up all hands in the distillery for a long period of time, where there's long fermentations, long, slow distillations, and maturations that don't have to be as long as other whiskeys have to be, because so much care was taken in the production that the flavor has already been created. So they can release whiskeys younger and more flavorful than any other distillery I've ever tried. So Cologne Baron Toul is my recommendation for something to have on your shelf to say, this is the future of craft Irish whiskey. This is the future of boutique whiskey distillation and an approach to goodness and not favoring economic efficiencies over flavor and pride and happiness in a day's work, a hard day's work, and a broken back for making a good whiskey. Killowen Baron Tool series.
I think Brandon Carty, founder of Killowen, who many of you are familiar with and know very well, really did fly the flag for craft Irish whiskey production. And I think he's flipped everything we ever believed to be true on its head. Like, you can see what he can do. A 4-year-old whiskey drinks like a 14-year-old whiskey. It's just unbelievable. His cask management, what he's doing, how he's producing this whiskey, a very traditional, very painstaking way, as you said, Barry. And he just nails it every single time. And again, Killowen's such a fan. Killowen cult is such a fan favorite within the community. And Brenda's only scratched the surface, I think, with what we've seen coming out of him so far. And again, he's like the Two Stacks lads. He's not stopping anytime soon.
The Greg says the issue is accessibility. Yeah, no doubt. When a distillery can only make 1 barrel a week or 2 barrels a week compared to a Middleton that can make 3,000 barrels a day, you're right. Accessibility is always going to be an issue. But I wanted to put in this wild card where it's not unavailable. Like, there are Baron Tools on shelves in California right now. You can buy it from Folsom Wine and Spirits. There's Killowen's on the shelf on whiskey shops in Ireland. It's available, not cheaply. So this is the most expensive of the whiskies that I've chosen. This is about 100. I think this was 130, 140 euros when we released it. It is expensive, but it's still not Redbreast 21, Redbreast 27 pricing. But it is indicative, I think, or maybe I'm hopeful that it's representative of where things are going that could be economically sustainable. Like, you don't want this to be so economically inefficient for the distillery that they just can't produce it anymore. But for what we're getting, I think we're paying a fair price. So it is my 5th and final choice of the evening to round out my selection, which is clearly a far better selection than Lauren's. I think you'd all agree.
I think, in fairness now, I will give this to you. You do have more classics in there than I did.
Well, I probably put more thought into it, Lauren. You kind of arrived at this about an hour before we went live and said, you know what, I'll cobble together, I suppose, some selection, keep the man happy. Whereas I sat down diligently for hours and spreadsheets and
It's cross-check costs for flavor, value, everything. No.
I was like a beautiful mind. I was like writing on glass boards.
Little spider map of everything.
Yeah. I got my red thread going and all my pins.
You definitely have more classics. I think I've went down more of the classic / innovation side of things for sure. But again, as we said at the start, there is no wrong answer. I actually spoke to Brendan during the week. I think it was Tuesday, and the guys from Two Stacks, because of course we're visiting both of those places.
It's just nothing but a sales pitch. It's just one long sales pitch this whole night.
In our September whiskey bus, which is great, and I'm very excited because it's my corner of the world that we're going to this time. Finally, I've managed to get Barry and Anthony on side to bring the bus north.
How dare you? We brought it up north. Our first ever whiskey bus spent more time in the north than any other day.
Yeah, but I wasn't involved at that stage, so it doesn't count.
Doug says Dingle didn't make the list. 694 whiskeys didn't make the list. It's a very tough thing. It should make, if you like Dingle, it should make your list. But there's only so much space. Again, very subjective. These are what we drink on the regular. I would say that of these whiskeys, I probably drink these 5 that I've chosen more than I'll drink any other whiskey. So it wasn't a difficult choice. Like, they are the ones that are all on shelf. They are all here, and they all get enjoyed. Others, it is also impossible. I don't know if you're finding this, Lauren, but there isn't the liver capacity to accommodate everything that's coming out of Ireland.
You genuinely can't keep up with every single release now. I think a lot of people have reached the conclusion that if they taste it at some stage, they're happy enough with that. They don't necessarily have to buy a full bottle. There's just so many releases. Like, think back to, when was it? I think it was maybe the first week in December. What was it? 5 releases in 1 week. Just, it was insane. It's a lot. It's getting to be quite challenging to keep up with everything.
I've had to rewire my thinking with it all, because in the early days, I almost felt like it was my job to get hold of everyone, to taste everyone. And then you quickly realize, well, that's not really feasible anymore. And it's not probably healthy anyway to do that. But there's ways to taste it too without, of course, drinking it all. But I've had to shift the thinking to rather learning more about it, trying to get the brands to talk about it, but not being able to, and being okay with letting things slip by me, let the conveyor belt go past and not grab them all.
Yeah. And like, you think of how many bottles you have sitting on your shelf there, opened, but maybe barely touched. I'm the same. Like, contrary to what everyone probably thinks about both of us, I wouldn't drink a lot of whiskey at home. Of course, I would have the occasional drop, maybe one night during the week, a few at the weekend, but I don't drink it excessively at home. So, and I'm the only whiskey drinker in my family. So this is all for me, and it's very hard to make a dent in any bottle. So you sometimes think as well, you're buying a bottle for it to sit on your shelf.
I know.
For a while, especially when you're the only one.
We're going to have a couple of parties where we invite people to come and just drink the shelves dry.
Yeah. Just free for all. Like, just open the floodgates, come in. Paul would probably still pick Jameson Orange over Bushmills 32 year.
Listen, the man knows what he likes.
Straight for it.
The when we were putting this together, the other thought was, if we were to use this list as a springboard into Irish whiskey, where you could use this list to introduce others to Irish whiskey, the next question was, so how do you go about that? Like, what do you do? So you have these whiskeys. The next thing is whiskey tastings. And many of us have attended whiskey tastings. Lauren and myself have hosted whiskey tastings. I know many of you have hosted whiskey tastings as well. For your friends, it was Lauren's entire job for many, many years to introduce people through a structured tasting. So, Lauren, I know you've got suggestions and ideas on perhaps how to best approach so that you're getting the most out of these whiskeys in a way that allows people to experience, enjoy, perhaps best take advantage of what's being presented to them. I wonder, could you help us think about how to think about a whiskey tasting that we might host?
I think we've presented 5 very solid options to begin a whiskey tasting with, regardless of where your audience or your guest, even one person, is on their Irish whiskey journey. But when you're hosting a tasting with friends, with family, might be work, your work colleagues, whoever it may be, the first thing you need to consider is the knowledge level. So, are these people familiar with Irish whiskey? Are they whiskey drinkers? Where are they on their journey? Have they been to Ireland? Have they even been to a few bourbon distilleries that they might understand the overarching principle of how whiskey is produced? So that's the first thing I would consider. The second thing I would consider is budget. So are these people wanting to buy any of the whiskeys that you taste afterwards? Are they willing to splash $50, $100, $500 on the bottle of whiskey? Kind of gauge that as well. What's the outcome of you're going to present these whiskeys to these people? Will they be able to afford to buy them? The next thing I would suggest is the flow of the tasting event itself. So if you're tasting different brands, are you going to cover a little bit of Irish whiskey history, kind of a general history of Irish whiskey? Do you go into the whiskey history of each brand, the story of each brand? Where do you stop? You don't want to be having people sitting in a room for 2 to 3 hours listening to you. So time is another that leads into time. How long do you have? That will depend on how many whiskeys you select and you want to taste. So those are the main things you might consider generally. Also, do you want to include every style of Irish whiskey, blend, grain, malt, pot still? Do you want to focus on cask finishes? Do you want to focus on wood that's being used, different woods, innovation with wood? What's the aim and the outcome? I would think probably about the outcome and work backwards. And then once you've decided all that, then you go back to the more basic things. Your glassware. Do you have appropriate glassware? Is it Glencairns? Is it the little stem glasses, the little port distillate glasses? What are you going to choose? What's easy for you to get? What's accessible? You want to have water. You might want to have a little tasting booklet where people can write down their notes, their thoughts of each whiskey as they go through. When you get to the fifth, sixth whiskey, sometimes you forget what you thought of the first whiskey. So it's good to be able to refer back. And you really want to give people the space then for questions. Do they have any questions about what you've covered, about the whiskey specifically? And then finally, accessibility. In your state, in your area, in your town, can these people find these whiskies easily if they want to buy them post-tasting? So there's loads of factors in there, but I would say start with the outcome and the aim and work backwards from there. It's probably the best advice I can give.
How do you determine how many whiskies is a good quantity for a tasting?
So I would say the best number I have found over the years, one, you never want to overload people because it's a disaster on both ends for crowd control, volume control, everything. And for their enjoyment as well. I mean, realistically, if you're drinking 8+ whiskeys, you're not going to remember what you thought of any of them. I would say the sweet spot is about 5. 4 to 5 whiskeys is a great number. People still really enjoy it. They get the most out of it, especially if you're covering the 4 styles of Irish whiskey. You might have 4 strengths in there, 4 cask finishes, 4 wood types, whatever it may be. 4 to 5 is perfect for your enjoyment and for the group's enjoyment and for time measurements as well. You could easily cover 5 whiskies in about 1 hour, 15 minutes, which usually you'll still have people's attention span. Especially if you've got little prompts. Maybe you have a PowerPoint presentation in the background with a little bit of information, video footage of the distillery, of the brand, and things that you can smell and you can touch are also really beneficial as well. So you might want to pass around a little bit of barley, a stave, a little piece of wood, new make spirit, anything at all that people can touch and feel to keep their attention on you is beneficial.
In terms of size, I've been at some tastings that have been, for lack of a better phrase, bloodbaths, where there have been up to 8 or 9 full pours of cask strength whiskey, like you're talking 30 milliliters or an ounce of whiskey. Obviously, safety first with all of these tastings when you've got your friends around. Do you have a size of a pour that you think is optimal for? Because it is a tasting, not a drinking. It's just a sampling.
No, if you're pouring 25, anything between 25 to 35 mil measures at a tasting, it's just insanity. No one benefits from that amount of whiskey in a very short space of time. My recommended pour, and typically what I did and what I would still do, is about 15 mils to 20 mils is fine. Just a little drop. You do not need any more than that when you're drinking multiple whiskies, and really just emphasize the need for hydration. If you drink 6 whiskeys straight after each other, your palate's wrecked, your taste buds are shot. Nothing is really of benefit to you at that stage. So hydration, even a little bite of it, like a bit of like a cracker or something like that, just to cleanse your palate in between times, is hugely beneficial. But I would say, about 20 to 25 mils.
If you're, one of my observations of tastings in the past is what can make or break it is whether the host has recognized the familiarity of the audience with whiskey compared to their own familiarity. In other words, if you're used to drinking cask strength whiskeys on the regular and you think pouring 5 or 6 of them for people who've never had whiskey before is a good idea, somebody's going to jail or hospital or worse at the end of it. And I think that, like, even if you think about 5 15 mil pours or 5 20 mil pours, that's 100 milliliters of whiskey. That's 1/7 of a bottle of whiskey.
It's a dram in a can.
It's a dram in a can. But for some people, they've never had whiskey neat. And so encouraging people to just have a sniff, just have a small little taste, don't feel any obligation to finish it. I think is maybe an important element to it as well.
I used to always say at the start of tastings, don't finish it if you don't want to. There's no pressure. And also do not shot it. Like, do not throw it back. Because again, as Rich said earlier, that's the nature of what many people are used to drinking whiskey, is the shot. So many people used to just throw it back, no appreciation for it whatsoever. And let's be real, not a lot of spirits taste fantastic when you shot them. It's just a hit of alcohol. You don't appreciate anything that's gone into that whiskey, whether it be fermentation, distillation, maturation, whatever it is. You can't get the full benefit of it. So it's always something I used to stress.
I remember hosting a tasting one time where I'd set up the tasting mat, 6 whiskeys, small little 10 to 15 ml pours, plastic shot glasses. And I remember explaining how the tasting was going to go. I turned around to grab my first bottle. And by the time I swung around, 2 fellas had stacked up all of their empty shot glasses like towers in front of them. In the space of 5 seconds of me turning around, they'd knocked them all back. And they were wondering if they could get refills. And I said, the only refill you're getting now is being refilled into your car because you're getting out of here. And someone's driving you home. You're not driving yourselves. But it can get kind of mad. And we forget that people don't always have the ground rules or understand or don't know the effects that much whiskey can have on them at the same time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I always think as well, when you're hosting a tasting, I said about the kind of gauging the knowledge level, a really good, not just for whiskey tasting, but generally in life, if you can't explain something to your audience in simple terms that they can understand, you don't understand it well enough yourself, unless you can really break it down and make it accessible, little bite-sized pieces of information that people are like, yeah, get that now, understand that now. You're not going to benefit people who maybe have a lower knowledge level. How I would generally gauge it is you always cater for the kind of the lesser knowledge level. So maybe someone who's not as familiar with whiskey. It's the same way if you go on a hike, you always walk at the pace of the slowest person in the group. It's just how it is. And then if anyone has any questions afterwards, obviously they can ask you. You can build on that. You can expand on a point if you make it and someone wants a little bit more information. You can always go higher, but I feel like when you start high, it's very hard to pull back.
There's many different schools of thoughts then when it comes to sequence of whiskies and what should be the criteria that you use to decide what way you're going to do a tasting.
Yeah.
Walk us through, if you were presented with a mixed bag of whiskies, what would you be thinking about in order to decide the sequence?
Yeah. There's so many factors that could come into play here. You would generally start typically with the youngest whiskey and also the lowest ABV. So you're kind of letting your palate adjust to what you're drinking. You're kind of building up to maybe a very high cask strength whiskey. That's one consideration. The other side of thing is, so again, this is all about gauging what the aim is. Sometimes you're better to start with the more expensive whiskey, because by the time someone's drank 4 other whiskeys prior to that very expensive whiskey, it's lost on them. So it just depends. I would say generally always go from younger whiskey or a lower ABV up. But then if your aim is to really drive or sell an older whiskey and it's maybe a new release or whatever it may be, if you're working with a brand or in a bar, I would maybe start with that one and go backwards if you're wanting people to get most benefit out of it.
I remember when somebody shared with me that point you made, Lauren, about starting with the most expensive, the rarest, the oldest whiskey, which we've all been to tastings where those whiskeys tend to be the crowning moment of the night. We've worked up to it. You're all going home after this. But of course, we might have gone through 5 pallets or 5 whiskeys up to then, and we're our palates are tired by the time we get to it. We can't really appreciate the nuance of that whiskey. So yeah, it's a bold move, but for the right whiskey, could work.
Because I remember initially when the Causeway collection was launched, putting I think it was 1995 Marsala at the time at the end of a 6 whiskey tasting. No one cared at that point. You had probably lost half of the audience because they were slumped on their seats. They had about 6 pints amongst the 5 whiskies. and you just felt like it was lost on people. So yeah, it just depends what your overarching aim of the tasting is.
Let's remind folks of the whiskies we chose tonight. If you've just joined us or you want a reminder, and again, this is always recorded. You can go back on YouTube and watch this show anytime you want. But we're going to put up on the screen here. We're going to do a little fly through of the whiskies that we chose tonight. So let me remove these banners here so we can actually see this thing. So Lauren's whiskies, Black Bush.
Yep.
Method of Madness.
Gariana. Yep. Powers Rye. 2 stacks dram in a can. And Teeling Single Grain.
What do we think of Lauren's choice for a home bar? 5 whiskies. Name them again here, Lauren.
Black Bush, Method of Madness, Gariana, Oak, Powers Rye, 2 stacks dram in a can, single malt or blend, and what was the last one? Teeling Single Grain.
Okay, very good. Good selection, solid selection. I'd be happy to visit your house for a tasting. My choices this evening were also Black Bush, Legendary Dark Silky, because we all need a bit of smoke in our lives. Redbreast 12, staple of any whiskey shelf. Bushmills 10-year-old, best value single malt, I think, out there. And Cologne Baron Tool for something unusual, rare, and a little bit special as well. Let us know what you think of those 9 whiskies in total. We each chose 4 different whiskies and then chose one the same. And those were our choices this evening. Let us know in the comments. And if you have any questions there as well, do let us know in the comments. We'll do our best to answer them for you.
I also would be happy to attend a whiskey tasting with those whiskies that line up.
Sold.
It's
€200 a head. I didn't tell you the price going into it, but you'd be welcome to attend.
$30, I'm sold. Let's do it.
What do you think of the list, folks? Did we nail it? Did we not? Of course, somebody mentioned O'Malley, Tipperary man living in New Jersey in our Facebook community mentioned earlier. He said, Barry, there'll be no 2 lists the same. No matter how many people come up with their list, there won't be 2 the same. True. And he was right. There weren't 2 the same. On that note, I heard an interesting factor in the week. When you shuffle a deck of cards, that sequence that you arrive at will never have been arrived at in history, nor will it ever be arrived at again in history. There are too many potential sequences for a deck of cards that no shuffle will ever be the same as the one before it. In history, does that blow your mind?
It does, but also, would you not question that? Like it might be very, very, very unusual odds that you might shuffle that. But surely you think of how many people globally are playing cards.
Oh, no. No. You're trying to bring in reason and emotion into things and logic, but no, this is just based on it's probability. Like it's not really like you almost can't argue with it. Okay, so here's another one, right? On that note, completely unrelated to whiskey. This is one of my great party questions that I love to throw out, and people will normally kick me out of the house after it. The question is this: if an infinite number of monkeys were given typewriters and infinite amount of time, would they come up with the complete works of Shakespeare? Now think about that for a second. Infinite monkeys, infinite time, typewriters, all the paper they need. Would they come up with the complete works of Shakespeare?
No. On that note,
the viewer numbers have gone.
What was that on this note? While we're continuing this theme of mental questions, I saw this on TikTok last week. It was if you put 2 babies, like 2 toddlers, in a room and had never spoken to them before, would they come up with their own language?
Yes.
Yeah. which is mad to think about,
But
actually.
I do feel like you're completely sidestepping the monkeys and the typewriters.
Straight up, no.
Well, you're wrong, because the answer is, of course, because with infinite time, everything will have been come up with. So every permutation of everything will have been come up with in infinite time. Everything you've ever read will be written by the monkeys. Now, the danger with this question is to be like, well, what if they spell a word wrong, or what if they maybe don't have the same paragraphs that Dickens or the Shakespeare had? It's nothing to do with that. It's more infinity solves everything. Okay, nobody's interested.
Where have we gone with this?
Nobody cares about this. Okay, nobody cares.
You're not telling the joke, Barry, of the magician and the monkey on the ship. No.
Great prom.
No, that's
Great. That's for next week. That's for next week.
You can pre-record that one and put it in the group at a later stage.
Actually, is it next week or the week after you're not going to be here? Because
Barry's jokes and drams with Barry.
Actually, no, I think you're here next week. But the week that you're not here, I'm going with my jokes, and you're not going to. Yeah. What was I going to say? Okay, so this is the point where we have a couple of things to give you information on. Lauren, tell us what's happening in the world of Irish whiskey experiences, what we need to know about, what is of needs urgent attention from our fine audience.
Well, there's many. I see a few people, certainly anyway, that will be joining us for our next Whiskey Bus, which will be taking place, and it will have well and truly started 8 weeks from today. We'll be traveling to Ireland's Wild West, spending a few nights each in Limerick, Galway and Westport, and enjoying phenomenal behind-the-scenes experiences with the likes of JJ Corey, Thomond Gate, Clare Island, and a fantastic start to the week with Napogue Castle, with Middleton Master Blender Dave McCabe in the castle itself, tasting some very rare whiskey, a liquid time capsule, if you may. That's the next thing. That's where my attention and priorities are at the minute, which is great. Very excited. It will roll around very quickly. We've got a few other little bits and pieces that we're working on in the background for private whiskey buses, which we'll not reveal just yet. But then, of course, last week, literally tomorrow, a week ago, we launched our next whiskey bus, which is going north, as I mentioned earlier, in September of this year. We'll be staying full 7 nights in Belfast and taking in the many distilleries around the city, and of course in the city as well, and up north to Bushmills, which we're very excited about. We have 1 seat left.
I think we can squeeze in 2.
We can definitely do 2.
If a couple wants to come, we'll not split them up.
No, we'll not.
We'll take 2.
There's either, if one person wants to join, no problem, or if you're with your partner or your friend and you want to hop on board, we think we can manage 31. We think we'll be okay with 31. So
the only downside is we got to kick Lauren off, but that's okay. You'll get me.
That's fine. I'll meet you every day. I don't have to stay anywhere or be on the bus. I'll follow you.
Perfect. You can get the Irish Whiskey Experiences tent that we've.
Yes. I'll just sleep on the bus. Alternatively, I'll just sleep on the back of the bus. No problem at all. So those are kind of where the priorities are directed at the minute. We know when we mention whiskey buses months out, it might seem like an eternity away, but believe me, when there's loads of moving pieces to pull together to make it happen, the time goes very, very quickly. So you need to keep on top of it, and that's where we're at the minute.
I don't mind teasing something that may or may not happen. It might not happen, but we are in talks with a cruise line currently.
We are. Oh, you really dropped the bomb. I wasn't expecting that.
It's on you go to our homepage of the website, it says coming soon. There's a picture of a cruise ship. So it's been a long coming soon. But we are having conversations about potential events in 2025, which is a while away. It may or may not happen. It is very early stages. There's a lot of logistical red tape that may or may not be overcome. So we're just know that conversations have started, We only say that to let you know that we're doing other things beyond just the buses, of course, and there's things being explored.
Just so everyone knows, to maybe bear in mind, keep in the back of your mind, 2025 for holidays and vacation purposes, there may be something coming. So there we
are. We'd love to do it. It would be a dream, and we'll share more details as we can. But there is, put it this way, there is excitement both on behalf of the cruise line and us, which is great news. So we'll see how we go. Excitement can lead nowhere, or excitement can lead everywhere. But we'll make what can work, and what can't work, we'll move on with our tail between our legs.
Absolutely.
That's what Lauren's been working on. Very exciting with Irish Whiskey Experiences. You can find a full list of our experiences, or behind the scenes, bespoke experiences, custom built experiences, always available experiences at irishwhiskeyexperiences.com. Check it out. Also, check out our social media channels, because Lauren makes great videos, and she videos great makers and produces great content that'll entertain you and keep you up to date about what we're doing in the world of Irish whiskey. And it's a nice behind the scenes snapshot.
We're on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok, all at the same username, at Irish Whiskey Experiences.
If you want to go deeper into the world of Irish whiskey, I run an Irish whiskey club called Stories and Sips, and it is focused 99.9% on Irish whiskey and occasionally on American whiskies that are connected to Ireland. We release exclusive Irish whiskies from distilleries and brands that you can only get through Stories and Sips. We do quarterly tasting events, virtual events, and more. We've got a couple of things coming up that I want to tell you about. The first is we have a very interesting Meet the Maker virtual event with a founder of a distillery in Ireland. Her name is Jennifer Nickerson. She is the founder of Tipperary Boutique Distillery. I attended an event in Galway last year that Jennifer was talking at, and she presented on the topic of the economics of a distillery. And it was simultaneously the most interesting and the most depressing talk I'd ever been at. And she'll say the same, because it highlighted the madness in terms of costs of running a distillery, especially as a family run, herself and her husband, and the wee baby running a distillery. The baby doesn't do a whole lot of distilling now yet, but it's on the cards. The current labor costs is definitely on the cards. But the costs of running the distillery are astronomical. It was such an interesting talk. And Jennifer has a background in finance and accounting, so she was able to present this in the most wonderful way. And I remember saying to Jennifer after the event, Jennifer, we need to hear this talk as consumers. Like, this was a non-whiskey consumer event. And so Jennifer is kind enough to agree to come on Stories and Sips and share the economics, literally the cost of building her distillery, where the money went, where money had, how the places where she never thought she'd have to spend money, etc., the considerations, the ratios, the yields. It'll be a fascinating talk. It's on February 8th. You can register on storiesandsIps.com, go to the club section. It's under the Meet the Maker events. You can register your place. It's going to be a really interesting talk. That's with Jennifer Nickerson on February 8th. We are, our next whiskey bottling is going to be with 2 Stacks Irish whiskey. It's our first blended whiskey. 40 of you were involved in the blending of it using this graduated cylinder here. And that blend is being put together as we speak. It'll be available in 700 milliliter bottles and companion cans. So if you want to buy a bottle and a can, or you want to buy a bottle and 10 cans, we'll let you do it. I've put in an order for 1,000 cans and 400 bottles of whiskey. So, we worry about who'll pay for this in due course. But the order's in. Don't tell two stacks.
It's all that matters. And stickers. The stickers, Kevin just said about the stickers.
Oh, yes. Stickers are going to be on the bottles as well. We'll put stickers on the bottles. I'll give you stickers to put on them. Our next club tasting is going to be with Redbreast Irish whiskey. These wonderful new kits that we've had put together are so small they should fit in your letterbox. They have been tested by us driving a forklift over them. They are quadruple rigid corners for ease of shipping, and when you open them, they have another soft kind of layer, another foam layer here, not so a hard foam layer. 3 bottles, sample bottles inside. You'll get instructions on what's in there. There's another rigid foam layer and another rigid foam layer below that. But we'll be shipping our first tasting using these will be with Redbreast, which we're really excited to partner up with Middleton on that. Dave McCabe, the master blender, is going to lead us on a tasting of those. And we have 2 more tastings in the pipeline, one with Method and Madness we're hoping to get over the line. And I have large plastic drums of whiskey on standby for another tasting that I can't reveal yet as well. So those are 3 tastings that we've got coming up really soon. Sinead, that's it. What have we missed?
We've covered it all tonight. That's a 2-hour Shebeen. That's the first for a while anyway, isn't it?
We promised each other 45 minutes.
We did, yeah. We were like, it's cold, it's freezing. We should be in bed with a hot water bottle, but here we are. No, it's good. It's great crack. I'm only joking.
Folks, thanks everybody for tuning in. We will see you in our community during the week, Facebook Irish Whiskey Fans of America Facebook group, or on the Stories and Sips channels or the Irish Whiskey Experience channels. Thanks to Lauren for her great contributions, her list. And thanks to you all for suggesting whiskies as well. And I'm glad you tuned in on a Friday night. Tell your friends to join us on a Friday night again, because Sundays are dead to us.
This is going to throw me now, though, because I think it's Sunday. Gonna wake up tomorrow and be like, oh, it's only Saturday. It's the weekend.
You get a lie in tomorrow morning with no guilt.
Exactly. The way it
Thanks,
should
everybody.
Be. Thank you so much, everyone. Lovely to see everyone as always. Sláinte.
Sláinte. Enjoy the rest of your night.